Gather round, my friends, and let me draw you into a world where grit meets passion, where a lone blacksmith with a tragic past crosses paths with a determined mail-order bride who refuses to let her new life be defined by ashes and ruin. The scorching sun of the wild frontier doesn't just blister the land, it tests the very souls of those who dare to tame it. In a homestead reduced to embers, two hearts discover that hope can be forged anew. If you want to witness a story of heartbreak resilience and a love powerful enough to move mountains, then stay right here. In the spring of 1883, the wide-open plains of the Arizona Territory beckoned dreamers and desperados alike. Clara Hathaway was neither, but she was desperate for a change. She was leaving behind a modest life in Providence, Rhode Island, to become a mail-order bride. The arrangement was made through an advertisement she'd answered during the bleakest winter of her life. Her father had died, her mother was taken ill, and her siblings were scattered to the wind. The man on the other end of the ad, a homesteader named Thomas Montgomery, wrote letters filled with talk of golden sunsets, fertile land, and a promise of a stable home. Thomas's letters were everything Clara longed for, warm, reassuring, and full of the promise that the West, even with its rawness, could offer a second chance at happiness. Months of correspondence had led her to this moment, riding inside a dusty stagecoach that creaked and rattled over uneven roads. She clutched his last letter in her hand. In it, he said, "By the time you read this, the orchard will be in bloom. I can't wait for you to see it." The thought of apple blossoms, pale pink and white, dancing in the breeze was enough to keep her fear at bay. She arrived at the dusty station of Cottonwood Gulch, a speck of a settlement, with a few wooden buildings, a single saloon, and a smithy that stood stoically near the edge of town. The stagecoach horses whinnied in relief, and the driver helped Clara down. She stretched her cramped limbs and looked around. There was no orchard in sight, no eager groom standing with a sign bearing her name. Maybe he couldn't get away from the ranch, Clara thought. She waited with her carpet bag at her feet, shifting her weight from one foot to another. An hour passed, then two. People came and went, but no one looked in her direction with recognition. A knot formed in her stomach. Eventually, the local postmaster, a thin man named Angus who wore spectacles and sported a carefully trimmed grey beard, stepped forward. He tipped his hat politely. "Ma'am, I reckon you're Miss Clara Hathaway." "Yes. Have you seen Mr. Thomas Montgomery?" she asked, voice wavering. Angus's expression darkened. "I'm sorry, but I've got some bad news. A blaze swept across parts of the region a couple weeks ago. Montgomery's homestead was hit." Clara's heart thumped so heavily she thought she might faint. Was he? Angus removed his spectacles and pressed his lips tightly together. "We don't know. The fire destroyed most everything. No one's seen Mr. Montgomery since." The stagecoach driver placed a supportive hand on Clara's shoulder. She blinked away tears and squared her shoulders. She had traversed thousands of miles. She was not going back. "Where is his land?" she asked, refusing to let the shock dissuade her. Angus hesitated. "A few miles outside town. I could escort you there if you wish." And so Clara found herself on the back of a rickety wagon, belonging to the kindly postmaster, heading off to see the land that was supposed to be her new home, her orchard in bloom. The trip out to the homestead was grave and silent. Charred patches of prairie stretched into the distance, ugly black scars on the otherwise sunlit land. Clara felt her heart pound with each rotation of the wagon wheels. She longed to see a roof standing somewhere, a glimpse of a fence, anything that spoke of the life Thomas had promised in his letters. Instead, what she saw was a heap of burned rubble where a cabin once stood. A solitary chimney rose like a tombstone in the center of scorched earth. The orchard, those apple trees that had seemed so beautiful in her imagination, was reduced to twisted stumps and ash. She climbed off the wagon in stunned silence, her eyes welling with tears. She tried valiantly to hide from Angus. She walked among the wreckage, stumbling over blackened boards. The tang of smoke still clung to the air, even though the flames were long gone. Clara's voice trembled. She cleared her throat and tried again. "What am I supposed to do?" Angus stood quietly behind her, hat in hand. "I'm sorry, Miss Hathaway. Might be that Thomas survived and is off searching for help, but he hasn't come to town. I wish I could tell you more." Clara let her knees fold beneath her. She sank onto a piece of half-burned timber and lowered her head into her hands. She wasn't just weeping for the heartbreak of losing Thomas, whom she'd never met, but felt she'd known intimately through letters. She was also weeping for herself. Here, she was alone in the West, with nothing and no one. After a moment, Angus gently touched her shoulder. "Let me take you back to town, Miss Hathaway. The local boarding house is run by Mrs. Withers. She'll give you a safe place to stay for a while. Maybe Thomas will show up." Clara inhaled shakily and looked around at the devastation. She saw something glinting in the ashes, a piece of metal. It reminded her of the new life she'd dreamed of, forging here. A wave of determination coursed through her, unexpected but strong. "All right," she whispered. "Take me back, please." On the ride back, her mind churned with questions. Who would set a fire like that? Or was it an accident? Thomas had never mentioned any enemies in his letters. She needed answers, and if no one else would search for them, she would. Cottonwood Gulch's main street was quiet, except for the rhythmic clang of metal from the blacksmith shop. Clara stepped down from Angus's wagon, her carpetbag in hand, and thanked him. He gave a polite nod. "If you need anything, just ask for Angus. I'll do what I can, Miss Hathaway." She forced a smile and made her way to the boarding house. Mrs. Withers, a stout woman with a kind face, welcomed Clara inside. She showed her to a simple room at the end of a narrow hall. "Pay when you can," Mrs. Withers said. "I know you must be going through a terrible shock. I heard about the Montgomery place. Real tragedy." Clara nodded, tears threatening again. She placed her bag on the rickety bed. "Thank you," she managed. She barely slept that first night. Thoughts of the orchard and the missing man plagued her. His last letter was tucked under her pillow. She traced the words with her fingertips. "I can't wait for you to see it," he'd written. The next morning, she mustered the courage to visit the sheriff's office, only to find that Sheriff Brannigan was away on business in a distant county. His deputy, a lazy-eyed man named Polk, merely shrugged when she explained her predicament. "Montgomery's a grown man," he said. "He's free to come and go. Maybe he's just traveled on." Frustrated and disheartened, Clara left. She refused to believe that Thomas had simply abandoned her. Her wandering led her to the smithy, an open-faced shop, where the clang of metal echoed through the small street. She stepped closer, mesmerized by the cascade of sparks flying from a red-hot iron bar as it was hammered into shape on the anvil. The blacksmith paused, wiped sweat from his brow with his upper arm, and turned his face toward her. He had a strong jaw and sandy brown hair that stuck to his forehead in the heat. As he shifted, Clara's breath caught. He had only one arm. His left sleeve was pinned neatly at the shoulder. He leveled his gaze at her, a mixture of curiosity and caution in his blue eyes. "Can I help you, ma'am?" he asked. Clara swallowed. She noticed that despite his apparent handicap, the work around the smithy was impeccably arranged. Tools hung neatly. The forge glowed steadily, and newly fashioned horseshoes were stacked in a corner. "I'm looking for information about Thomas Montgomery," she said, her voice subdued. "I was supposed to marry him, but his homestead burned down, and now no one knows where he is. I'm desperate to find out what happened." The blacksmith's eyes softened with something akin to pity. "Montgomery heard about the fire. That was a real shame. Folks around these parts suspect foul play, but can't prove it." Clara's heart fluttered. Foul play? So it wasn't an accident? The blacksmith shook his head. "No official word on it. Name's James Carter, by the way. Folks just call me Carter. I run this smithy for the ranchers in the area. I didn't know Montgomery well, but I heard he'd been trying to stand up to some local trouble." Clara latched on to his every word. "What kind of trouble?" Carter sighed, picking up a horseshoe with his one hand and examining it. "You might ask around about Jeremiah Polk, the deputy. Man's got his fingers in a lot of unsavory business. Also, the Parker family. They own a big ranch, want to gobble up land around these parts. Montgomery's orchard was right in their path. Rumor has it he refused to sell." Then the fire happened. A chill ran through Clara. She recalled the disinterested attitude of Deputy Polk, but she never would have guessed he might be involved in something sinister. "So Thomas might have enemies. Or maybe he just got unlucky," Carter said, placing the horseshoe back on the anvil. "Either way, you be careful. This territory eats the naive alive." Clara squared her shoulders, determined. "Thank you. I'll be careful." She turned to leave, and Carter added, "Miss, if you need help, let me know. I may have just one arm, but I ain't helpless." She offered a small, genuine smile for the first time in days. "I might just take you up on that, Mr. Carter." Over the next week, Clara found few answers, but plenty of rumors. Some said Thomas had been killed in the fire, and his body had never been found. Others claimed he was on the run from unknown pursuers. Still others whispered that the orchard was cursed by the spirit of an old Apache shaman who once lived on that land. Every dead end she encountered served to ignite a fiercer determination in her heart. She refused to accept that Thomas was simply gone without a trace. Late one afternoon, after a fruitless day of questioning town locals, she found herself back at the blacksmith shop. Carter was carefully shoeing a mare using a specialized device that allowed him to hold the iron shoe steady despite having only one arm. Clara marveled at his strength and ingenuity. After finishing, he offered her a place by the small bench where he took a swig of water from a canteen. "How goes your search?" he asked, reading the weariness in her eyes. She sat down beside him. "Not well. People are tight-lipped, and I feel eyes on me wherever I go." She paused, feeling a little foolish. "Maybe I'm just being paranoid." "You're likely not," Carter replied, resting the canteen on his thigh. "Small town, big secrets. Folks here might know more than they let on. And if you keep asking about that orchard, you might be poking a hornet's nest." Her heart sank. "I can't stop. I've come so far. I can't just give up on Thomas." Carter studied her, the lamplight highlighting the faint freckles across her nose. "You're brave, Miss Hathaway. That's not easy to come by." He hesitated, then continued. "I lost my arm years ago in an accident. A horse spooked during a storm. My father tried to hold it down, but I got pinned. Infection took my arm soon after. People said I'd never smith again. But here I am." Clara felt a surge of admiration. "Then you understand why I won't back down. This is my future, my promise." Carter nodded slowly, a spark of respect flickering in his eyes. "Let me help you then. You shouldn't wander alone. As I said, I may not have 2 arms, but I know my way around a forge. And a gun, he added quietly. Their investigation began in earnest that evening. They decided to visit a local rancher named Jonas Dwyer, a man known for his fair dealings and dislike of the Parker clan. Dwyer's homestead, set against rolling hills, boasted fields of alfalfa and a large barn. He greeted them with cautious politeness. Carter Dwyer said, nodding at the blacksmith, "You're welcome here. This the lady folks been talking about?" "Yes," Carter replied. "She's looking for Thomas Montgomery." Dwyer scratched his stubbly chin. "I never met Thomas personally, but I know of him. Honest fella from what I hear. Real proud of his orchard. It's a crying shame what happened." Clara stepped forward, hands clenched. "Do you have any idea who might have set that fire?" Dwyer's gaze flicked over to Carter before returning to her. "Rumor says it's the Parker boys. They're always harassing small landowners to sell. They want to start some massive spread that covers half the territory. I've had a few scuffles with them. Their men ride around, break fences, let cattle loose, try to starve you out." He paused, eyes bleak. "But I never expected they'd stoop to murder." Clara's throat tightened. "So you think it was them? What about the missing man?" Thomas Dwyer sighed. "No idea. Maybe he ran for his life. Maybe they shot him. Could be anything." They thanked him and left, and Clara's thoughts whirled. If the Parker family was responsible, how could they prove it? The sheriff was out of town, and the deputy was rumored to be corrupt. As they rode back toward Cottonwood Gulch in Carter's small wagon pulled by a calm, dappled horse, Carter turned to Clara. "We have to be careful if we're going to go after the Parkers. They're powerful." Clara nodded, her eyes fixed on the horizon, turning a dusky purple. "I just want to know what happened to Thomas." Carter was silent for a long time. Then he said quietly, "I know you came here to be his wife. But with each day that passes, it seems less likely that we'll find him alive." She drew in a trembling breath. "If he's gone, I at least want to bury him properly. He deserves that much." Despite her grief, Clara couldn't bear the thought of the orchard going to waste, Thomas's orchard, the one he'd so lovingly described. She asked Carter if he would help her assess the damage and see if there was any possibility of starting anew. Armed with tools, water, and a determination that belied her slight frame, Clara traveled with Carter to the burnt homestead. Together, they walked the blackened soil, searching for signs of life. To her surprise, a few sprouts of green pushed up from the ash. Some of the apple tree roots had survived. She knelt down and gently touched the fragile leaves. "Not everything's gone," Carter murmured. "Nature's resilient. So are people." Clara felt tears prick her eyes, but this time they were tears of cautious hope. She turned to Carter, chin trembling, and whispered, "I want to rebuild it, James." The use of his first name came naturally as she clung to this dream. He stared at her for a long moment, then nodded. "We can salvage some of the lumber from the debris to build a small shack. I'll craft nails and hardware at the smithy, but we'll need money for other supplies." Clara swallowed. She had only a small amount of savings and no other means of income. "I'll find a way," she said firmly. "I'll sew, I'll bake, I'll do whatever I have to." And so began a new kind of life for Clara Hathaway. Each morning she borrowed Mrs. Wither's kitchen to bake bread and pies, which she sold to the saloon owner, Mr. Otis. He was a wiry man with a mustache that curled extravagantly on each side, and he loved her apple tarts. Though apples were scarce, she managed to find a few from Dwyer's orchard, enough to make small pastries that sold like hotcakes to the miners who passed through. By noon, she helped Carter with any tasks he needed in the smithy, running errands, polishing tools, organizing his workshop. Though she had no skill in metalwork, Her presence gave Carter some relief and companionship, something neither of them realized they craved so dearly. In the evenings, they gathered any leftover materials from around town, storing them in the wagon for the eventual trip to the ruined orchard. Their routine soon attracted notice. Word spread quickly that Clara, the mail-order bride left adrift, was attempting to rebuild Thomas Montgomery's homestead. Some in town admired her pluck. Others shook their heads, believing her efforts futile or ill-advised. One afternoon, while she was busy collecting scrap lumber, she felt a prickling sensation on the back of her neck. She turned to see Deputy Polk watching her from across the street. His expression was unreadable, his lazy eye making it difficult to determine his line of sight. Nonetheless, his stance radiated hostility. "Miss Hathaway," he called, crossing the street. "Working hard, I see." She clutched the lumber bundle tighter. "Yes, Deputy. Is there some law against that?" He smiled thinly, revealing yellowed teeth. "None. But folks might start to wonder why you're putting so much effort into land that might not even be yours. Last I checked, you weren't yet Montgomery's wife." Clara bristled. "I'm doing what I can. If Thomas is alive and comes back, I want him to have his home. If not—" her voice faltered slightly. "If not, I'll make sure it stands as a testament to what he tried to do." Polk chuckled darkly. "Real noble. Just be careful whose toes you step on. The West can be an unforgiving place for folks who don't mind their own business." Her heart hammered, but she stood her ground. "I'll keep that in mind." Polk tipped his hat and walked off. Clara exhaled shakily. She knew that behind his mock politeness lay a threat. Later that evening, she confided in Carter about her encounter with Polk. He nodded grimly. Figures he'd be sniffing around. "Probably wonders how close we are to discovering who set that fire." Clara clasped her hands together. "I can't do this alone, Carter. We need a plan. If the Parkers or Polk are behind Thomas's disappearance, they won't just stop at intimidation." Carter leaned against the anvil, an expression of resolve hardening his features. "I've never been one to run from a fight, but we have to be smart. The sheriff is out of town, so there's no official authority to help us. We could try to gather evidence, maybe some eyewitness accounts. If we can prove the Parker family's involvement, we can make a case when the sheriff returns." A thin thread of hope wove through Clara. Who else might know something? Carter considered. The old prospector Bill Hawkins claims he sees everything that goes on from his shack outside of town. He might have seen who rode out near Montgomery's place the night of the fire. Hawkins is a strange one, but he's honest in his own way. They agreed to pay Bill Hawkins a visit the next day, not realizing that their conversation was overheard by one of the stable hands loyal to the Parkers. News travels fast. In small towns, especially news worth paying for. That night, Carter woke to a frantic pounding on his smithy door. He rushed to open it, still half groggy with sleep, to find Clara breathing heavily, lantern in hand. Her hair was disheveled from running. "Carter," she gasped. "Someone set the stable on fire. The one next to Mrs. Withers's boarding house. Mrs. Withers is out in the street screaming for help." Instantly alert, Carter yanked on his clothes. "Get the water buckets," he ordered. They dashed out into the night. The scene was chaos. Flames danced along the stable roof, and the horses within kicked and neighed in terror. Townsfolk rushed around with buckets of water, forming a line from the well, trying desperately to quell the blaze. Smoke and sparks filled the air, stinging Clara's eyes. Carter ran to the stable doors, ignoring shouts from concerned onlookers, and forced them open. With skill and bravery, he freed the panicked horses, guiding them out single-handedly. When one of the spooked horses nearly trampled him, Clara seized a halter and calmed the animal long enough for Carter to pull it aside. After what felt like hours, the flames were finally doused. The stable was half collapsed, but Mrs. Withers's boarding house stood intact, though scorched by embers. Mrs. Withers clutched Clara in a tight embrace. "Thank you, dear. You saved my house. I thought the whole row would go up in smoke." Clara soothed her trembling hands, but inside her own heart pounded with anger and suspicion. First, Montgomery's orchard, now a stable, next to where she was staying. Was it a coincidence? The pattern was too terrible to ignore. "It's a warning," Carter murmured, standing beside her, breathing hard from the exertion. "They're telling us they can strike anywhere." Clara looked up at him, her eyes reflecting the flicker of the dying flames. "We can't let them scare us." The next morning, exhausted but resolute, they set out to find Bill Hawkins, hoping he could shed light on the events surrounding the orchard fire. His shack lay beyond the edge of town, perched near the base of a rocky mesa dotted with scraggly bushes. A rickety fence surrounded a vegetable garden that looked more like a weed patch. Hawkins was an elderly man with a wiry beard, wearing clothes that had clearly seen better days. He blinked at them from under a wide-brimmed hat. "What brings you to my humble abode?" he asked, suspiciously eyeing their wagon. Carter explained their purpose, mentioning the orchard fire and the missing homesteader. Clara chipped in with her own heartfelt plea. "We just want the truth. Did you see anything the night of the fire?" Hawkins chewed on an unlit pipe, his lips twisting. "I see plenty," he said cryptically. "The question is, who's askin'?" Carter introduced them both, and Clara offered the prospector a small bundle of homemade biscuits and jerky as a peace offering. Hawkins eyed the food, then nodded. "I ain't got teeth like I used to, but I can still gum a biscuit," he grumbled, accepting the package. They waited as he settled on a creaky stool, rummaging through a tin box for matches to light the pipe. After what felt like an eternity, he said, "I saw men riding out that night late. 4 of them. Real hush-hush. They was heading toward Montgomery's place. I recognized one." Clara leaned forward. "Who?" Martin Parker Hawkins said, spitting out the name like a curse. "Mean cuss. Got no sense of decency. The others I didn't get a good look at. Might have been ranch hands." Carter exhaled. "Did you see them set the fire?" Hawkins shook his head. "By the time I got close enough to see anything else, the place was ablaze. But I did see Montgomery running out of there holding a bleeding arm. One of the men chased him. Then I lost sight of him." Clara's heart pounded. "So Thomas was alive that night?" "Sure as I'm sitting here he was," Hawkins said. "But I can't say what happened after that chase." Armed with this partial testimony, Clara felt a mix of relief and dread. Thomas had escaped the fire, but had he been captured, or worse afterward, Parker and his men were dangerous, as was Deputy Polk, who might be assisting them. That evening, Carter invited Clara to share a meal in his small quarters behind the smithy. It was a humble space with a cotter table and a stove. He prepared a simple stew. Clara helped chop the vegetables, noticing how proficient Carter was at one-handed tasks. In the flickering lamplight, they found themselves speaking in hushed tones about the next steps. Hawkins' story links Parker to the fire, Carter said. "If only we could find Thomas alive, or otherwise that might be enough evidence to bring Parker down once the sheriff returns." Clara nodded, stirring her stew. "But how do we find Thomas, when we don't even know if he's still—" She couldn't say the word alive. The weight of uncertainty pressed on her chest. Carter hesitated, then rested his good hand gently on hers. "I promise you We'll keep searching. If there's any chance, we'll find him." Their eyes met. In that moment, Clara realized the extent to which she relied on Carter's unwavering support. She felt a swirl of conflicting emotions, guilt for feeling so close to another man while searching for her would-be husband, gratitude for Carter's kindness, and a blossoming admiration for the blacksmith's quiet strength. She turned away, swallowing hard. "Thank you, Carter. I don't know what I'd do without you here." He cleared his throat, removing his hand from hers. "You're strong enough to stand on your own, but I'll be here as long as you need me." Days passed with no further incidents. Clara and Carter took advantage of the lull to rebuild a rough shack on Thomas's homestead. It wasn't much, just 4 walls, a roof and a door, but it offered them a place to store supplies and gave Clara a sense of purpose. One afternoon, while rummaging through the debris in the hopes of salvaging anything, Clara's hand brushed against something tucked inside a scorched crate. She pulled it out, a letter sealed in a wax envelope. The edges were singed, the ink smudged but still legible. Her heart hammered as she realized it was addressed to her, but the handwriting wasn't Thomas's. She delicately opened it, careful not to tear the brittle paper. "Miss Clara Hathaway, if you receive this, it means that tragedy has befallen me. The orchard was my life's work, and I fear powerful men will destroy it. I pray you will not be harmed. I am in hiding at the old mission ruins in White Rock Canyon. I dare not come into town, for they watch every road. If your heart still allows, find me there, but be cautious, there are eyes everywhere." The letter was unsigned, but Clara recognized the mention of the orchard. Who else could it be but Thomas? A surge of hope and relief rushed through her. She ran to Carter, breathless. "I found this," she said, thrusting the letter into his hands. "He might be alive." Carter read it quickly, his brow furrowing. "White Rock Canyon's a dangerous place, rough terrain, hardly any water. But there are indeed old mission ruins there." He met her gaze. "We have to go find him." They set out at dawn, loading Carter's wagon with supplies, food, water, bedrolls, and Carter's rifle. Clara's heart fluttered with nervous excitement. If Thomas was alive, this might finally be the moment she'd dreamed of. Yet she couldn't ignore the strange tightness in her chest when she thought of Carter. The journey took them away from Cottonwood Gulch, through winding trails dotted with cacti and sagebrush. The heat was relentless, and sweat beaded on their brows. Gradually, the landscape morphed into rocky cliffs carved by ancient rivers, leading them deeper into White Rock Canyon. They arrived at the mission ruins in the late afternoon. The adobe walls stood crumbling in the harsh sunlight, the roof long gone, exposing the interior to the sky. Carter reined in the horse, scanning the area warily. "We have to be careful," he murmured. "If Parker's men followed us." Clara slid off the wagon seat, her heart pounding. "Thomas," she called softly. The echo bounced eerily off the walls. No answer. They explored the shattered remnants of the old mission. Weeds and tumbleweeds had claimed much of the floor. Pigeons scattered overhead, startled by their presence. Clara's spirits began to sink. Had they arrived too late? Was the letter a trap? Suddenly, a ragged cough reached their ears. Carter gripped his rifle, moving toward a dark corner where a pile of rubble formed a makeshift shelter. Beneath a tattered blanket lay a man, barely conscious. Clara gasped, rushing forward. It was Thomas Montgomery, his face pale and his arm wrapped in a filthy bandage. "Thomas," she cried, kneeling beside him. He stirred, eyes fluttering open in confusion. "Clara," he croaked. You came." Tears of relief blurred her vision. She gently lifted his head, offering water from her canteen. He drank greedily, then coughed. Carter knelt beside them, carefully inspecting the wound. "Bullet graze," he muttered. "He's burning up. The bandage is old. Infections set in." Clara swallowed hard. "We have to get him to town. Get him proper care." Thomas clutched her hand, wincing. "No, they'll find me." Carter frowned. "We can hide you, but you need a doctor. If we wait too long, the infection could kill you." Thomas's gaze shifted to Carter, and recognition flickered. "The blacksmith. I've heard of you. Your skill. You're her friend." Clara nodded. "He's been helping me search for you to rebuild. Please, Thomas, let us help." Thomas's eyes slid closed, his exhaustion overpowering him. With Thomas loaded carefully into the wagon, they began the precarious journey back to Cottonwood Gulch. Every bump made him groan in pain, and Clara held his hand, whispering reassurances. Carter drove swiftly, mindful of the rocky terrain, yet desperate to beat the setting sun. They arrived in town after dark, heading straight for Doc Avery's small clinic. A lamp glowed in the window, guiding them. The aging physician shook his head as he examined Thomas. "He's in bad shape. I'll do what I can, but the fever's high." Clara hovered anxiously. Carter stood behind her, his expression grim. "Do your best, Doc," was all he said. For hours, Doc Avery worked. He cleaned the wound, administered laudanum to ease the pain, and applied fresh bandages soaked in antiseptic. Clara prayed quietly by Thomas's bedside. Carter kept watch outside, scanning the street for any sign of unwanted visitors. Near dawn, Doc Avery emerged, wiping sweat from his brow. "He's stable," he said, exhaustion in his voice. "But the fever must break soon, or—" He trailed off. Clara nodded numbly. She thanked the doctor and slipped inside, sitting by Thomas's bed. He was ghost pale, trembling with fever. She dabbed his forehead with a cool cloth, tears slipping down her cheeks. "You have to pull through," she murmured. "You promised me an orchard in bloom." News of Thomas's return spread quickly through town. The next afternoon, Carter was in the smithy, hammering out more nails for the orchard shack, when Deputy Polk strode in. The blacksmith narrowed his eyes, stopping his hammer mid-swing. "Afternoon," Deputy Carter said tersely. Polk smirked. "Heard that Montgomery fella is back in town half dead. Must be quite the story he's got to tell." Carter set down the horseshoe he'd been working on. "If you're here to arrest someone, get on with it. Otherwise, I'm busy." Polk chuckled. "Arrest? Not yet. But you give Montgomery a message. Tell him there's some folks mighty upset with him. If he's wise, he'll keep his mouth shut." Carter's jaw tightened. "You threatening him?" Polk tilted his head, that unsettling grin widening. "Just a friendly warning. Don't want no trouble in my town." Carter's throat pulsed with anger. He forced his voice to remain steady. "We'll keep that in mind, Deputy." Polk left. Carter stared after him, fury blazing in his eyes. Thomas lingered on the brink of delirium for days. He muttered incoherently about the night of the fire, about men on horseback, about betrayal. Clara was always by his side, giving him sips of water or broth, wiping his brow. Carter brought fresh bandages and offered moral support, but he never lingered too long in the cramped room, sensing that Clara and Thomas needed privacy. At last, on the fourth day, Thomas's fever broke. He opened his eyes to find Clara, dozing in a chair by his bedside, her hand resting lightly on his arm. He coughed softly, and her eyes snapped open. "Thomas," she cried softly, relief flooding her. He tried to speak, but his voice was raspy. "Clara," he managed. "I thought I'd lost everything." She shook her head, tears of relief glistening. Not everything. The orchard, it's damaged but still there. And I came. I told you I would. Thomas's gaze was distant, haunted by memories. They shot me when I tried to run. I barely escaped. I hid in that canyon waiting until it was safe. Clara nodded gently, stroking his hair. Who were they? He swallowed hard. Martin Parker. And his men. Polk was in on it, I'm sure. They wanted me off the land, but I refused to sell. So they burned it down, tried to kill me. His eyes filled with pain. I never wanted you caught up in this. She blinked away tears. I want to be caught up in it if it means helping you. Though Thomas was alive, the situation in town had become a powder keg. Parker's men rode through the streets with thinly veiled threats. Deputy Polk eyed Carter's smithy every time he passed, making it clear whose side he was on. Clara found herself in a whirlwind of emotion. Thomas, the man she had traveled so far to marry, was here. She cared deeply for him, wanted to see him heal. But in those lonely days and nights, it was Carter who had stood beside her, protected her, and inspired her. Was it possible to love two men in different ways? The guilt gnawed at her, but there was no easy answer. All she could do was focus on the immediate danger. One evening, Jonas Dwyer, the fair-minded rancher, called a meeting at the local saloon. Concerned citizens gathered to discuss how to stop the Parker family from bullying and harming more landowners. Clara attended with Carter. Thomas was still too weak to travel. Voices rose in anger and frustration. Some insisted that without the sheriff's presence, there was little to be done. Others clamored for vigilante justice. Dwyer silenced the crowd. Let's not lose our heads. We need evidence and a witness who can pin the crime on Parker. Montgomery might do it, but he's in no shape for a confrontation. Clara stood, feeling her heart pound. Thomas survived an attempt on his life. Surely that's enough for an arrest. Polk, who had slipped into the back of the saloon, sneered. You got any proof, little lady? Some battered man's word don't mean much without evidence. The tension in the room, mounted men shifting in their seats, hands drifting toward weapons. But Carter spoke up. We do have a witness. Bill Hawkins saw Parker ride out to Montgomery's the night of the fire. He told us so. Polk shrugged, unaffected. That old coot's testimony wouldn't hold up. Clara's fists clenched. She realized this meeting wasn't going anywhere with Polk present. The crowd began to mutter, and soon fear of retribution from the Parker family overshadowed any resolve. Dwyer adjourned the meeting, cautioning everyone to stay vigilant. Outside, Carter guided Clara away from the scowling deputy. We tried, he murmured. We have to keep Thomas hidden until the sheriff returns, or until we can gather undeniable proof. Clara nodded, tears of frustration burning in her eyes. We'll do whatever it takes. As Thomas recovered, he and Clara spent hours talking. He told her about his dream of cultivating the orchard, how he'd planted the saplings himself. She shared her life back east, the heartbreak that led her to become a mail-order bride. One evening, while the sun set in a blaze of orange outside the clinic window, Thomas reached for Clara's hand. I'm sorry, he said softly. I promised you a new start in a warm land, and instead I gave you this. She squeezed his hand gently. Don't blame yourself. I chose to come here. I want to help make that orchard a reality. He searched her face. But is that still what you want? After all you've seen, Clara hesitated. The orchard was still part of her dream. But so much had changed. She thought of Carter and how he'd risked his life for her. Shame crept over her. Thomas was the man she'd come to marry. Could she tell him about the confusing feelings that had grown in his absence, Thomas seemed to sense her turmoil. He lifted his hand to her cheek. "Clara, if you decide this is too much, I understand. I release you from your promise. Don't feel bound to me." She shook her head, tears brimming. "Thomas, you're a good man. I won't just abandon you in your hour of need." He smiled, but a shadow lingered in his eyes. "Thank you." Outside, Carter lingered, overhearing snippets of their conversation through the thin walls. A knot tightened in his chest at Thomas's words. He realized, perhaps for the first time, that if Thomas recovered, Clara might stay with him as she'd intended from the start. Of course, Carter murmured to himself, that's what she came here for. Yet the dull ache in his heart suggested he wanted something else entirely. When Clara emerged, Carter could see tears in her eyes. She wiped them, hastily composing herself. "He's resting now. How is the orchard shack coming along?" Carter cleared his throat. "I added a new door, sturdy with iron fittings. Gonna hold up even if Parker's men try to bust it in." She nodded, but her thoughts seemed far away. "Thank you," she said softly, placing a gentle hand on his arm. He felt warmth spread from that spot. But before he could say anything more, Doc Avery called for her. She disappeared inside, leaving him alone on the silent street. Unbeknownst to them, Martin Parker was growing impatient. He summoned Deputy Polk and a few of his loyal ranch hands one night at the Parker Ranch. Wine sloshed in fine crystal glasses, a luxury in the rugged West, while Parker laid out his plan. "We need to end this once and for all," he hissed. "Montgomery's alive. Word is, he's got a bullet wound but is recovering. If he testifies, we could all hang for that fire." Polk tipped back his glass, unperturbed. "Then, we make sure he don't testify." "Simple enough." Parker nodded, his face twisted in a malicious grin. "Make it look like an accident. Maybe a robbery gone wrong. I don't care how you do it, just get it done." One of the ranch hands frowned. "What about the blacksmith and that woman? They've been meddling too." Parker sneered, waving a dismissive hand. "Kill 'em all if you have to, but keep it quiet. I won't have a lynch mob at my door." "Understood," Polk smirked, wiping his mouth. "Understood, boss." Late one night, while Clara and Carter were taking watch at the orchard shack, they often stayed there. Now, hoping Thomas could join them when he was strong enough, they heard the thunder of hooves. Carter leaped up, grabbing his rifle. Clara's heart hammered. She doused the lantern, plunging the shack into darkness. Shouts came from outside. "Come on out, Blacksmith. We know you're in there." Carter nodded silently to Clara, guiding her to a safer corner. He moved to a small window, peering out. By the moonlight, he could see 3 riders circling the shack. One fired a shot into the air. "We got a message for you too," the man yelled. "Stay down," Carter whispered to Clara. A bullet thudded into the door. Carter returned fire, aiming carefully from the window. One rider yelped and toppled from his horse. Another cursed and fired back. Splinters flew as bullets ripped into the walls. Clara cowered, her pulse racing with terror. Suddenly, the pounding of more hooves echoed. Her heart soared momentarily, thinking the sheriff had returned. But it was Jonas Dwyer and a couple of his ranch hands, drawn by the gunfire. Shots crackled in the night, and the attackers, outnumbered, wheeled their horses and fled. One wounded man was left behind, writhing in the dirt. Dwyer dismounted, rifle ready. Carter stepped cautiously outside. The wounded attacker groaned. Carter hauled him up, glaring into the man's face. "Who sent you?" The man, a pockmarked fellow, spat blood. "Go to hell." Dwyer's men bound his hands. We'll take him to the jailhouse." Carter let out a trembling breath, adrenaline coursing through him. Clara stepped out shaken but resolute. "We can't wait for the sheriff any longer," she said, voice firm. "Parker wants blood." Dwyer nodded. "We've got enough good men here to stand against Parker. We'll protect Montgomery and we'll finish this tonight." At dawn, Cottonwood Gulch stood united. Word of the latest attack had rallied townsfolk, farmers, miners, even aging veterans ready to defend Montgomery and stand against Parker's reign of terror. Carter, Clara, and a frail but determined Thomas stood with them. When Parker Polk and a dozen armed men rode into town, they were met by a wall of resistance. Parker sneered, "You think this changes anything? I own this town." Thomas, weak but defiant, stepped forward. "You can't burn down what you don't own. And I'll testify to what you did." Clara stood beside him, Carter at her other side, rifle in hand. Tension crackled in the dusty air. But Jonas Dwyer and others joined in demanding justice. One by one, Parker's men backed down. Polk lowered his weapon. Parker, seeing no way out, surrendered with bitter fury. The townspeople cheered not for revenge, but for reclaiming their freedom. For the first time in a long while, Cottonwood Gulch breathed free. When Sheriff Brannigan returned 2 days later, he found the Parker clan locked in the jailhouse, flanked by armed townsfolk. Jonas Dwyer Carter and Clara all provided statements. Bill Hawkins testified what he'd seen. Thomas, though still weak, recounted the night of the fire. The injured ranch hand in custody eventually confessed everything implicating Parker and Polk. Sheriff Brannigan, outraged that his deputy had been involved, promised swift justice. Parker and Polk would stand trial for arson, attempted murder, and a laundry list of other charges. As Parker was led away in shackles, he glared at Clara and Thomas. "This ain't over," he hissed, though the fear in his eyes suggested otherwise. Clara watched him go, feeling a profound sense of relief. The man who'd caused so much pain would finally answer for his crimes. With Parker behind bars and peace settling over Cottonwood Gulch, Clara turned her focus back to the orchard. Thomas, though still healing, stood beside her, and Carter dreaming aloud of new blossoms. But tension lingered in Clara's heart. 2 men had stood by her in different ways. Thomas' eyes soft spoke first. "You came here to be my wife, but if your heart lies elsewhere, I won't hold you to a promise made on paper." Clara's heart thudded. She looked between Thomas and Carter, the man whose letters had brought her west, and the man who'd stood with her through fire and danger. Both had her gratitude. Both had touched her deeply. "I don't have a clear answer," she whispered. "Thomas, you were my dream. Carter, you've been my strength. I can't choose out of guilt or fear." The men exchanged solemn nods. Carter's expression was guarded. Thomas's eyes held sadness but understanding. "For now," Clara said softly, "let's rebuild. The orchard comes first. The rest, I'll let my heart decide in time." As the wind rustled the charred soil, new roots of hope began to grow. In the months that followed, the orchard slowly began to revive. With the support of the townspeople now free from the Parker family's intimidation, Thomas replanted saplings. Carter fashioned new tools and hardware. Clara tended the tiny shoots that sprang from the blackened soil, amazed by their resilience. Summer turned to autumn, and the orchard's new leaves quivered in golden sunlight. Thomas's wound healed, though he carried a scar on his upper arm. Carter continued his work at the smithy, earning respect for his craftsmanship and humility. Clara worked tirelessly side by side with both men, her heart still unsure. She prayed every night for clarity. As winter approached, something shifted in Clara's heart. She woke one crisp morning, sunlight filtering through the window of the orchard shack, feeling a profound sense of peace. She rose dressed and walked outside to find Carter already at work. He was forging a new plow blade over a portable forge he'd set up near the orchard. Sparks flew in the cold air. He paused when he saw her wiping sweat from his brow. "Morning," he said, voice gentle. She stepped closer, arms wrapped around herself for warmth. "Morning." She hesitated, then softly added, "I have something to say, and I hope you'll forgive me for taking so long." He set his hammer aside and faced her fully. "I'm listening." She drew a shaky breath. "I know I care deeply for Thomas, and I will always respect him. But what I feel for you, it's different. It's a love forged through trial and danger, through trust and understanding." She paused, tears welling up. "I choose you, Carter." For a moment, he just stared as though he couldn't believe it. Then a smile broke across his face, tentative and filled with wonder. He reached out, wrapping his arm around her, pulling her close. "Clara," he whispered, voice thick with emotion. "Are you sure?" "Yes," she said, tears spilling. "It's not a rejection of Thomas. It's a decision to follow my heart." He kissed her softly, the warmth of his embrace chasing away the winter chill. Thomas took the news with a quiet grace that broke Clara's heart. He sat with her on a log near the orchard, the last leaves quivering in the fading autumn wind. "I always suspected," he said, voice sad but accepting, "the way you two looked at each other." Clara wiped her tears. "Thomas, I'm so sorry." He forced a gentle smile. "Don't be. You saved my life. You helped me rebuild. I'd never want you to stay out of pity. I want your happiness more than anything else." She threw her arms around him, and they both wept softly, a mingling of sorrow and gratitude. When they separated, Thomas gazed at the orchard, already planning for the spring. "Someday this place will be in full bloom, and maybe we'll both stand together, proud of what we accomplished." Clara nodded, voice trembling. "I'd like that." Snow dusted the orchard in white as winter deepened, but life continued. In a simple ceremony under the wooden arch that Carter had crafted, wrapped in leftover ribbons that Clara had packed from Providence, they said their vows. Jonas Dwyer acted as Carter's best man, and Mrs. Withers stood by Clara's side, beaming with pride. Thomas attended, leaning on a carved cane. The small gathering of townsfolk cheered as Carter and Clara kissed, forging a new bond in the harsh but hopeful land they had come to call home. By the spring of 1884, the orchard once again showed signs of life. Tiny blossoms unfurled on the saplings, painting the air with their delicate perfume. Thomas had taken up a small plot of land nearby, where he built a modest cabin. He hired a few hands, determined to see his orchard thrive. Clara and Carter lived in a sturdy house that combined the orchard shack with a new addition. The blacksmith traveled back to Cottonwood Gulch twice a week to run his smithy, but otherwise spent his time helping Thomas reinforce fences and cultivate the orchard. Deputy Polk and Martin Parker were sent to prison, their hold on the town broken by the unity of its people. Cottonwood Gulch began to flourish without the heavy hand of intimidation. Shops opened, travelers passed through, and new families settled. On a warm day in mid-April, Clara found herself gazing across the orchard in bloom, pink and white petals dancing in the gentle breeze. She felt Carter's arm around her waist. Together they marveled at the promise of fruit that would come in the summer. Thomas approached, carrying a basket of seedlings. His limp was more pronounced, but his spirit was strong. He paused beside them, nodding in satisfaction at the orchard's revival. "You both stuck with me," he said, voice husky with emotion. "I'll never forget that." Carter placed his hand on Thomas's shoulder. "We're all in this together." Clara smiled, feeling the warmth of the sun and the warmth of two men who had changed her life forever. In that moment, she realized that hope, like an orchard, could be reborn from ashes, growing stronger and more beautiful than ever imagined. Thank you for joining us on this journey through the frontier, where the promise of a new life clashed with the cruelty of lawless men and ultimately triumphed. We witnessed Clara Hathaway's unwavering resolve as she fought to uncover the truth behind a charred homestead, helped a wounded soul heal, and discovered her own heart along the way. We saw how community courage and compassion can stand against even the most powerful enemies. And yes, we glimpsed the quiet miracle of an orchard blooming once again, a testament to second chances and the enduring power of hope. If you found inspiration in this tale of resilience, if it touched your heart or sparked your imagination, please take a moment to like this video, share it with fellow lovers of Western drama, and subscribe to this channel. Your support helps our storytelling grow and flourish, just like those tender apple blossoms. Thank you.